area at risk of inundation if there's heavy rainfall or other kinds of extreme weather events, of which there are many in the upper Midwest, as we know from the science of climate change, exacerbating the possibility that the contents of both the open pit and the waste material on the surface will be discharged directly into the Menominee River. Next. 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 So to give you some sense of where this proposal is in terms of the geography of Wisconsin and Michigan, it's on the border of Michigan, Wisconsin. It's in Menominee County, but of course, right across the river is Marin, Wisconsin. It is an interstate water body that should, in fact, be treated as a federal water project, but is now being considered exclusively a Michigan permitting project, which does not take into account people on the Wisconsin side of the river, nor does it take into account the treaty rights of the Menominee Nation, who have their historic settlements at the actual mine site, and Guy and the other members of the tribe will talk about that later on. Both Michigan and Wisconsin DNR have worked to clean up the river from past discharges from paper mills. They've invested $41 million to clean up the lower part of the river. It is an important sturgeon spawning ground. 90% of the sturgeon that end up in Lake Michigan have their origins at the headwaters of the Menominee River. And of course, if you are if you're discharging toxic metals into the river, you're going to destroy the habitat for the sturgeon, as well as the entire fishing industry of smallmouth bass along the Menominee River. Menominee Nation's sacred sites and cultural resources are within the footprint of the mine, not around it, but right in the footprint of the mine. And so this is both an environmental assault as well as an assault on native culture. Next. 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 This is what acid mine drainage looks like. When you have the waste material containing sulfide mineralization, creating sulfuric acid, releasing heavy metals, you essentially have biological dead zones. There's no plant life, no aquatic life. These are permanent national sacrifice areas. There are 12,000 miles of rivers and streams that have already been contaminated by acid mine drainage. And in order to clean them up, as you saw in the video in the very beginning, taxpayers are going to have to fork over $27 to $57 billion to clean up the wastes left behind by mining companies that made their profit and then left the area. Next. I talked about the vast amount of waste material that's going to be accumulated during the excavation and processing of the ores. The most toxic part of the processing operation results in what are known as tailings, which is when the crushed ore comes out of the milling process, where all those chemicals, cyanide and sulfuric acid, are used to separate the gold and the zinc from the rest of the waste rock. You end up with a fine sandy material having the consistency of talcum powder that is then stored in what are known as these tailings or waste impoundment areas, which are actually mislabeled containment areas, because there are very few tailings disposal areas which have actually contained the wastes. And there are two reasons for that. One is, you have these, what are known as the dike walls, which are simply the crushed waste material piled up against the edge of the other waste materials. It's not like there's a cement wall or anything preventing the edge of the waste from discharging into the environment. And then you have these seepage collection ditches, which are designed to catch the effluent that comes from the percolation of water through the tailings. So you have extreme rainfall events. The rainfall percolates through the waste material, enters the whole chemical cycle of the sulfide minerals, and creates acidic solution at the bottom, which have to be continually pumped out and run through a waste treatment plant in order to be discharged into the surface water. But after 20, 30 years, when the mine closes, who is responsible for collecting the seepage? Who is responsible for cleaning up the waste at the waste disposal site or the waste treatment plant when the company has closed down all the facilities at the site. The responsibility ends up being a taxpayer liability. Next. And of course, as I said, there are very few of these modern tailings disposal areas that have actually contained the wastes. You have both the engineering problems of amassing large amounts of waste in unstable land areas where the accumulated waste material is putting pressure on the underlying rock formations, and you have extreme weather events, and you have simply engineering mistakes where they are not monitoring shifts in the composition and the stability of the tailings area. One of these events occurred in 2000 on the Romanian-Hungarian border when 100 tons of cyanide waste entered into the river, Tisza River in Hungary, creating 1,400 tons of dead fish, destroying the fishing industry on the river, causing towns downstream to cut off their water input from the river because of the contamination, and finally creating a record of discharges of toxic materials from tailings areas to the point where Montana voters in 1998 banned the use of cyanide in gold mining. The Czech Republic banned it in 2000, and Menominee County, where the mine is located, the county board passed a resolution opposing the use of cyanide in Menominee County. Next. Now, the mining companies and the industry will tell you that these accidents are events of the past, that we've learned how to better construct tailings disposal areas, we have better engineering, we have more responsible environmental engineering. None of that is true. None of it. The best evidence we have is that catastrophic mine waste failures in which all the contents of these millions of tons, hundreds of millions of tons of toxic tailings are discharged into the environment, are increasing in frequency, severity, and costs all over the world. Nearly half of all recorded serious failures happened in modern times between 1990 and 2010. So this notion that our technology has improved over the last 20, 30 years, that isn't the case. The most serious failures have occurred in the last 10, 20 years. This is not a problem of the past, this is a problem of the present, and it will be a problem of the future because right now and in the foreseeable future, the metals that are in the Earth's surface are in such small quantities that companies that want to extract these metals in order to make a profit have to expand the scope of their operations to encompass these large open pits because they have to accumulate a large amount of rock in order to create a small amount of profitable metal. For every ounce of gold in your gold wedding ring or your gold graduation ring, 1 ounce of gold equals 20 tons of toxic waste. 20 tons of toxic waste for every ounce of gold. That is the ratio of metal recovered to waste created. Next. Before you get it, next. So the other thing about the small amounts of metal is that you not only have large amounts of waste, but you have the problem of how to stabilize the facilities, the engineered facilities, which are supposed to be containing these wastes, when you have piles of waste that are as high as the Washington Monument, 555 feet high, a mile long, or the New York Times building, 748 feet. Some of these tailings piles are 700 feet and a mile long, and if there is a catastrophic release of materials, you're going to have a major catastrophe on your hands. And of course, these are state-of-the-art failures, state-of-the-art engineering, which were created during a period before engineers had any inkling of the dangers of extreme weather events created by climate change and global warming. The whole engineering philosophy of these tailings ponds was made before any kind of awareness of what extreme weather events have done to the stability of these facilities. Next. So, 2014, 3 years ago, the worst tailings dam accident in North American mining history occurred in British Columbia. 1 billion gallons of mine waste entered into rivers on the Fraser River in British Columbia, downstream where indigenous communities depended upon the river for their drinking water and for their fishing. Here is where the breach occurred. All of this fine sandy material are the ground up waste material, the tailings, that contain the sulfide minerals and the heavy metals. And here's where the breach occurred. And the reason why it occurred is because the company did not want to horizontally expand the area for its tailings as it continued the mining process, because that would require a new permit and new expenses. So instead of expanding horizontally, they expanded vertically. They simply piled more waste onto the already unstable formation of the tailings area that was the original design 20 years ago. And eventually, when you pile hundreds and millions of new tons of tailings on existing tailings, you create enormous pressures on the underlying bedrock. The bedrock cracks, and you create a fissure, and you create the entry or the fracture that allows the entire contents of the tailings disposal area to enter the river. Next. This is downstream of the Fraser River, 30 miles downstream, a month after the tailings spill. All this white material is the precipitation of the metals in the sediment and in the edges, the shoreline of the river, which makes cleanup a virtually impossible task. Scientists say it is virtually impossible to clean up the mess left behind from these tailings spills. And of course, Aquila Resources next. Aquila Resources has no analysis of what would happen to the Menominee River if there were a sudden discharge, catastrophic release of tailings from the disposal area on the edge of the Menominee River into the Menominee River, or how much it would cost to clean up, because they say that this is a minimal possibility. Scientists that know anything about tailings say this is not a minimal possibility, this is a likely possibility. And so the American Rivers has listed the Menominee River as one of America's 10 most endangered rivers due to the threat from open pit sulfide mining. And there's the Menominee River. Yes. Next. The proponents of the repeal of the mining moratorium law say we don't need a mining moratorium law because we've already demonstrated that sulfide mining can be done safely,